All right, good morning, good afternoon. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thank you for joining us for this session. Let people flow into the room and then we'll just get going pretty quickly. We have a lot of great news for you. All right, I think we'll just get going. Start with the introductions, and then we'll let the rest of the people flow into the session. My name is Dario Pagani. I'm Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Autel Energy. And then I'm joined by John Gilbrook and Tom Brotherton. John, Tom, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thanks, Dario. Welcome everybody. John Gilbrook, I'm VP of Sales here at AmpUp. Uh, been in the EV charging industry for 16 years, and looking forward to supporting the webinar today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Brotherton with CalSTART, and I work on our portfolio of incentive projects, which cover truck, bus, off-road equipment in a number of different states. Thank you.
Thank you both. So this will be a fairly packed agenda, also given yesterday's news, of which we'll be talking about in a little bit. We'll be covering market momentum. We'll be covering the project spotlight. We have a couple of cool projects to show you a little bit about how they came to be. Program landscape, the combination between vehicles and charging, as well as how the programs are designed, and as well as what you can do to design for approval and for continuous success. And we'll leave some space at the end, some time at the end for Q&A. Now this session will be recorded and will be made available on demand. And as mentioned, we will, if you could hold your questions until the end, or you can put them into the chat. There's a Q&A functionality in the webinar, so you can put in your questions at any time, and we'll get to them. We'll get to them towards the end of the webinar. But without further ado, we'll get going. So as far as the momentum of fleets, I took the liberty of going through the Analytics report for 2025, and we had a very strong growth when it comes to both L2 and L3 when it comes in fleet, as well as a good momentum when it comes to behind the fence, kind of L2 projects, which were largely driven by Amazon deployments. However, when you think about, concentration of projects, there were some standouts: California, Washington, Colorado, and Texas being also making their name known in the space. So when you look at the makeup of these different fleets, so there are different types of projects that come to mind: school bus, municipal fleets, logistics. I've had the pleasure of visiting a couple of different sites from a school bus standpoint and a municipal slash utility fleet type of project, and it was quite amazing to see the makeup of different entities that came together and different programs that came together to make these projects happen. And something that we want to shed a little bit of light on is how these projects come together, and how these programs can make it simpler for you to plan, especially because it's not just money being available, but there's a lot of resources that are available at your fingertips, just to get started and get your bearings in this type of project. I was actually quite encouraged to also see that projects like airports and fleets, airports and ports, starting to make their way into the ranking. So we'll see a lot more of that, I think, coming to bear this year. Now, when it comes to utility territory, there are a couple of aspects, right? There's one being like geographically where they are, and secondly, how friendly they are to electrification of fleets and how quickly they can get their act together and in actually making the electrons available on the site. So PG&E obviously has been a leader, since the get-go. It was very important to see, utilities like Dominion and ComEd, Excel, and even Con Ed New York, kind of come, to, uh, to this graphic with some notable projects. Now, interestingly enough, I was on the phone with National Grid the other day, and they mentioned that there is a bit of a misconception that Mass EVAP program is not currently accepting applications, but reality is that it's still open. As a matter of fact, John is a Massachusetts resident, and he has been dealing with this program for quite some time. So, John, how's that going?
Yeah, as you said, common misconception. The programs in Massachusetts, both the state programs and the utility programs, have been very successful to the extent where some of the programs, the funding has been consumed, but not Mass EVIP fleet funding is still very much alive and well, as are various pots of money on the utility side related to fleet specifically. So if you have projects in Massachusetts, absolutely keep this in mind, and I think any of us happy to be a resource to support it.
As you can see, there are resources and funding available for both the vehicle acquisition as well as charging equipment. Charging equipment is primarily focused on L2. This was a program that also included a portion for workplace. The workplace portion is currently paused due to the fact that they received enough application to deplete that pot of money. However, the fleet applications are still very much live and accepted. So now we're going to dive a little bit in a couple of projects. One project that got a lot of attention here recently was Helix Water District, and I think that this slide is, we could probably spend a good amount of time just on this slide talking about how, they structured their fleet and how they actually went to deploy. The overall size of the site is quite important with almost 6 MW worth of power coming in. But what's really important, what I really wanted to zoom into is the right part of the slide when you have that $10.2 million worth of funding that came together in quite a bit of interesting way. Actually, Tom, we were chatting about this a little bit earlier. What's your thought on this makeup? I know you were quite happy to see that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. There are four different funding partners. So Helix really did their homework, pulling together partnerships. You've got the local air district in San Diego. You've got the local utility, SDG&E, as well as the California Energy Commission, who really focuses on infrastructure support. And then Helix puts in $1 million themselves. But look at that leverage. So about a 10-to-1 ratio, right? The total project cost is worth about 10 times more than just Helix's initial investment themselves. So they really did a wonderful job of reaching out and pulling in partnerships and making something that's much larger than they could just do on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at that. It's almost 100 vehicles being supported by this project, anywhere from light duty to heavy duty with tractors and off-road, components as well. And the cash equivalent of 3 to 5,000 homes worth of power being pulled into the site, which is again very, very impressive. I was on site for the ribbon cutting. It was quite a big deal locally, and one of the interesting aspects of this is that they actually pulling in um, neighboring agencies' vehicles as well to as they are on the road to charge. So there will be SDG&E vehicles that will stop by, and they will act as a little bit of a local CPO, if you will, for utility and fleet vehicles. So the other one that I thought was interesting to highlight was Stockton Unified School District. Now, the reason why I wanted to highlight this, not only because it was a very important deployment with dozens of buses. Actually, I think they're now having they have above little bit north of 70 buses electrified. And not only that, but as you can see, it's mostly level 2 charging that they have on site. which I think is very important to point out because when we think sometimes of fleet charging, or truck charging, we think DC fast charging. What's important to note is that there are different ways of electrifying the fleet and charging it, and it's all dependent on dwell time. It's like how big is the battery? How long are they going to be sitting stationary in a park, in a surface lot or a parking structure? And that's really the time that you have to get them ready. And the cost effectiveness of some of these level two applications is definitely something that needs to be pointed out. As you can see, we're 70 buses with a 1-to-1 ratio with a port with level two. That means that you don't have to rotate vehicles in and out. Once they're in the depot and they get dropped off by the driver, they're charging and they're going to be there until that driver comes back to pick the bus back up. The other cool thing that I heard about is that the school district is developing a workforce development program with student internships that is specific to electrification and fleet management, which I thought was very, very cool. Now, Tom, when it comes to programs, obviously we have some standout vehicle programs here on the slide. I know that WASIP just came online. I mean, tell us a little bit about your end of the world.
Yeah, so on the vehicle side, HIP is around for a long time, so it's kind of the granddaddy of vehicle incentive programs. It's in its 17th year. There's still money to be requested, and that's important to make note of. So it's really all different funding sources here. We can cover public fleets, drayage trucks, school buses, transit buses, drayage trucks specifically used in ports. About $213 million is still remaining. We're still open for HVIP, so if you get onto HVIP's website, you can take a look at the catalog and see what vehicles are in there. And then I just want to point out both Texas and Washington. Texas has a good amount of money available, over $100 million for heavy-duty vehicles and equipment, and Washington just opened. So this is brand new news. It's only been a couple weeks since the WASIP program launched. And so far, I think there have been requests for about a quarter of the money so far, but it's once again a pretty broad portfolio of medium and heavy duty vehicles, off-road equipment, as well as some supplements to cover EVSE. So it isn't so much an infrastructure incentive program in and of itself, but it's a vehicle program that has add-ons that can at least defray the cost of EVSE for a project.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, and I've been asked that question a lot when I was at ACT Expo last week. It's like, if we had to choose, would you have infrastructure incentives or would you have vehicle incentives? In my book, if I had to pick between the two, I've always picked vehicle incentives. One, because, it gives the vehicle is really what the application, the is, and it's something that people are used to. And the electrification of the infrastructure is going to come as a natural consequence of it. And on top of that, we're going to be able to size, the charging application to the fleet correctly instead of having to fit a certain mold that may or may not be mandated by a program. Now, this was the part that I was really excited by yesterday. So, when it comes to fleet electrification and vehicle incentives, obviously we have had HVIP in California for quite some time, as Tom pointed out. However, this was fresh news from yesterday, with an additional $1 billion in rebates made available for medium and heavy duty fleet vehicles. This is for all fleets with a carve out for public fleets that goes also into some light duty applications. Now, Tom, like, how does this play with HVIP? Obviously, you guys have already funded more than 2,000 fleets and caused, basically enabled 180 million miles of electric driving that stays statewide. But how do these two programs interact?
Yeah, so this is really exciting. And I think the key point that I see is it's more money. So HVIP has already paid out over $1 billion of incentives to date. Uh, there's still, even though that's over 17 years, if we look at the last 8 months of HVIP, we've had $460 million worth of vouchers requested in 8 months. So we need more money. And this program, Clean Fuel Rewards, brings more money. And it's very similar to HVIP, so that it uses a different funding source. This is LCFS credits in California. It's administered through Southern California Edison, but on behalf of the entire state of California. So really, in many ways, it can operate much like HVIP. But the important thing is it's bringing an additional $250 million a year for 4 years, a total of $1 billion to the market. So this market can maintain the momentum that we've seen recently in HVIP. HVIP is waiting to see what kind of new money it may or may not get in future years. So this is really important to have a secure source of 4 years worth of funding for more vehicles. Once again, you can think of it operating pretty similar to HVIP. There's some specific rule differences, but it's a lot more similar than it is different.
Yep, that's a very good point. And you were telling me that regardless of the program, people actually can come to CALSTART for advice as they're considering both the vehicles and the charging infrastructure.
So yes, as part of the programs we've administered, we've found, and this came about only in the last few years, that we realized there's a bit of a gap in technical assistance. So larger fleets are well able to either solve things themselves or hire a contractor to help them. But we find, especially on some of the smaller fleets, whether it's to get a perspective of just where do I start in electric vehicles, or maybe they have a specific question that they just want answered. Either way, they can come through. We have a program called Cal Fleet Advisor, which is funded through CARB, and it's a free service. Ask us any question you want, and you can either interact with us through email, call us on the phone, we do a Teams call. But the bottom line is we help fleets out, and we've replicated that up in Washington State. So there's a really broad portfolio of technical assistance available in Washington State, either through us or through Washington State University. And once again, we're there to provide a fleet with, hey, how do I get going? Or maybe I've just got a specific question. Either way, we're there to help. Massachusetts as well. So we've provided this service in different states, and we found that it's a really important resource for fleets to understand that they've got a place they can just come and get their questions answered.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we saw with Helix, they had like 3 different funding, sources, and orchestrating all of that process, definitely can seem daunting at first.
Right, exactly.
Now, Tom, I think we're getting into the weeds of what your world looks like. Kind of take us through this program landscape.
Yeah, so I just want to point out that this is not just 1 or 2 states. So there are up and running programs: California, Colorado, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Texas, Washington. So it's a lot of the major states that you pointed out where, it's funny because you see where charging is going in. Well, here we go. And this is hand in glove, right? So if you provide vehicle incentives, you really stir the market up in those states, and charging is to follow. In addition to those are vehicle incentive programs, there's separate state infrastructure programs in some of those states. And in a later slide, I'm going to talk about how some states have put them together. There's utility incentives for charging, utility district by utility district. And then some utilities are actually directly providing incentives for the vehicles themselves, not just the charging, and that's pretty new. So historically, we have seen electric utilities support charging, but now some are even getting into directly supporting vehicle incentives. And then new market entrants generating increased demand. So in HVIP, we've seen this year a lot of interest in the upcoming Tesla semi-truck, which is slated to roll out over the second half of 2026, probably with an increased market share in 2027 as the manufacturing rate increases. So that's pretty exciting to see new entrants coming on and really increasing the interest in zero emission vehicles.
Yeah.
So here are a few examples of some of the state programs. So using the historical model in California, you can go to HVIP and get vehicle incentives. You can go to Energize, get charging incentives. Then there have been some combinations. So ZESP is specifically a school bus incentive project in California. There it's a single application that pulls in CARB money for the vehicles, Energy Commission money for the infrastructure. Same thing up in Washington State. We're combining both the truck and charging in a single incentive. It's a little different there because it's an add-on just to cover some of the funding for the charging EVSE itself. It's not meant as a holistic project of really paying for soup to nuts, everything involved in establishing charging.
Yeah, now, John, I mean, obviously we have, you have been on the side of implementation for quite some time, and when it comes to to customers actually looking at these different incentive programs and the combinations thereof. So do they normally start from the charging or do they start from the vehicle side? I'm kind of curious to hear that.
Yeah, I'd have to say it's a mixed bag. I think that probably more frequently on the fleet side from the vehicle side because that's their focus. They're looking for, they see available incentives out there to offset the cost of electric fleet vehicles that, I think pretty broadly folks know reduce operating costs significantly. So if they can buy down those incremental upfront costs, then they're interested. And then of course, as you put it, Dario, once you start exploring a vehicle, you have to explore infrastructure. And so then I do think, the point made about leveraging these available resources that are either provided by folks like CalSTART or others. As a CMS provider, we also provide design resources as well, and are familiar with the programs. I think that's a great place to start because as you put it, like no matter where you begin, there's usually a puzzle, there's a bit of putting the puzzle pieces together. And if you can do that kind of early at a high level once, as opposed to doing it kind of iteratively throughout, and I think it goes faster. Two, it's just more efficient. So, but I'd say it comes from certainly both directions, but I think on the fleet side, it's vehicles first.
Yeah, which, supports the fact that, there are some questions that you need to have answers or answered early, like what is the pattern of these vehicles? How long are they going to be sitting in the parking lot and whatnot, so that you have the operational side down before you actually look at anything else.
And I will say through our advisory system, start with a vehicle, but don't wait on infrastructure, right? So
Hmm.
start that planning early. Really, you want to get moving. The last thing you want to do is take delivery of a truck. So you got to start early on the infrastructure side. We've noticed,
Absolutely.
especially for energization, it could be a waiting time working with your utility. So you can start with that vehicle, but pretty darn quickly after that, you better start planning for that infrastructure.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, like programs have evolved over time. I think all of us have been in the industry for quite some time. Now, what are some of the things, Tom, that have changed and gotten a little smarter over time?
Right. So in the old days, there was just a blanket incentive. If it's a Class 8 vehicle, it's $120,000, regardless of what it is. So we've seen infrastructure as well as vehicle incentive programs that tend to be more focused on specific applications. So on the vehicle side, that means there's a specific drayage program that might pull in some port funding. On the infrastructure side, there's a difference between depot charging and public access charging or megawatt scale charging. So you have these funding lanes that are really geared toward different applications and they might open at different times. And so in both the vehicle side as well as infrastructure incentives, we've seen tailored programs within a program. So there might be one umbrella program, but it's got four different funding lanes. Also, incentive amounts can be adjusted for market changes. So they can be increased or decreased as needed over the course of time. So you don't just launch a program and leave it go forever. And then sometimes there are caps that are put on. We've seen programs that might cap manufacturers, they could cap fleets as a way of at least giving multiple fleets a chance at coming in and accessing funding. Sometimes they're needed, sometimes they're not needed. And then finally, in the market, we see a bunch of these new, really interesting financial models. Early on, you had two choices, right? Or two or three choices. You buy a truck, maybe you take out a loan, maybe you take out a lease. Now we've got these things like truck as a service, charging as a service. So there are different financial models where it isn't just a matter of a fleet owning a vehicle, owning its charging. We want these incentive programs to be able to work in these new regimes, funding regimes. And so we're trying to find out, okay, who actually gets the money now for truck as a service or charging as a service, where you can still identify an end user, but maybe the money goes to a provider. So
Hmm.
that's just another iteration of keeping up with some of these new financial models that are coming to the market.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, I mean, obviously the programs have gotten smarter, the structures have gotten a little more defined and less broad. So obviously, a lot more room for you know entities like CALSTART and Autel and AmpUp and some of our turnkey providers to actually inject a little bit of support when it comes to
Right,
that planning, because obviously we don't want fleets to have to become experts at everything.
right. Yep.
Now, John, over to you as far as like the implementation itself and designing. We're talking about the complexity of it. Like, how do we address that from a charging ecosystem standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the goal here is just as a widely integrated open source charging software provider, right? Charge management provider. With we support a lot of different projects from a variety of angles that are seeking incentive funding, and so this is kind of a summary of the ways in which we see applications make themselves more attractive, just increase their likelihood of success. Some of these programs are very competitive, becoming more so. And so like really differentiating your application, I think, as Tom pointed out, like the programs have evolved, the demand for these programs has gotten greater. And so the level of sophistication an applicant has to be successful has also risen. That's why leveraging, technical resources and other things that you can, from whether it's free services like provided like Tom mentioned, or from vendors like us, it can really put you in a solid position. So, the first thing I'd mention is thinking about really what the problem you're trying to solve with the fleet, right? So I think as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of interest in the Tesla Semi and Class 8 trucks generally, but those projects require significant electrical work, and which is attractive, I think, to some service providers and integrators out there. But at the same time, it makes the projects have very long lead times. And in some cases, they can't get built at all because the utility actually can't support the electrical requirement in particular areas. And frankly, to kind of make those applications successful, the applicant has to be as sophisticated as one can be, because they really need to prove that the investment that the project is going to have is going to get built. It's going to have a high likelihood of success. So the diligence required from, utility service, having load letters from a utility, get at least a general assessment that the power is available, an assessment of the fleet use case, and whether or not the technology is a good fit there. All the bars are just higher. So a focus on, again, I would say 4 to 6, because we're really talking in a lot of these programs about medium duty. But the smaller fleet vehicles, the electrical requirements for the infrastructure are a lot lighter. In a lot of cases, they can be served with overnight charging. In some cases, just level 2 charging. And again, if it's an initial phase, you might even be able to support it without a service upgrade to a location. If a service upgrade is required, you're talking about something that's much more palatable to a local distribution company, a local utility, where the engineering and the just the general process of getting it getting the service fed is a lot lighter. So I think, thinking about if you're an integrator and you're prospecting, thinking about fleets that the electrical requirements might be lighter than say Class 8 will probably give you projects that can happen faster and have a higher likelihood of approval. And then if you're a fleet and you have a wide array of vehicles, thinking about the medium duty or light duty vehicles first before the heaviest duty vehicles are a good place to start. Um, the second, something and this really goes back to the question you asked me, Dario, is like, do folks come from the infrastructure side or the vehicle side? It's a mixed bag. I think, like I said, it comes from the vehicle side, but unfortunately, what we see a lot of times is it only comes from one side. And so there's oftentimes you'll have those responsible for vehicle acquisition pretty far down the path of making a decision or having made a decision around a new vehicle type, an electric vehicle type, and they haven't engaged with their own colleagues on the infrastructure side. And they look at, it ends up presenting significant delays, or in the kind of the worst case, it kills projects after a lot of effort's been put in because they haven't thought about, the reality is when you adopt EVs, certainly medium and heavy duty electric trucks, you're talking about a pretty meaningful, infrastructure, one investment, project learning curve for those responsible for infrastructure. So keep bringing those teams together and making sure that they're planning together, that the infrastructure matches the vehicle, not just the vehicle type, but its duty cycle is just critically important. It also then what it allows you to do is make your application that much, the diligence in your application that much more clear for the funding entity, right? It comes across more thoughtful, again, with a higher, these funding entities want to fund projects that are going to proceed with a high likelihood of not just it's going to get built, but that these vehicles are going to be in operation for their life. And so having a lot of that diligence done up front, showing that you've thought about both angles up front is really important. Um, I think the other thing on the low risk design side is you got to be thinking about it's really the point I made before, right? I think leveraging resources ahead of time to make sure that you understand the programs that you're pursuing and all of them. So all of these funding entities want to see that you're maximizing the funding available from various pots of money, right? Including cost share, private cost share. That everybody has some skin in the game, and so showing again a thoughtfulness around the available pots of funding, and that you're leveraging them to the fullest extent. You have that diverse capital stack, that you have that you again you've married the vehicle and infrastructure side. You've thought through not just the technology readiness, but that you understand how you're going to operate these vehicles for a significant period of time. And then I think the other thing that often gets missed is a lot of these programs are, they're kind of all after the same purpose, which is reducing emissions, often in environmental justice communities or areas like that, economically depressed communities. So having a clear story around how your project supports the funding goals is also critically important. So I think having that full picture, that 360-degree picture in your application is key. Another thing, I think a pitfall we see from time to time is applications that are just always shooting for the moon, going for the whatever the maximum the funding cap is, that's what they want to go do, and the meat underneath that ask isn't adequate to justify the ask. So, what we often will advocate for is, don't pad the budgets of leaner projects that are, again, more thoughtful. The ask is more clear and more targeted, have a much higher likelihood of being funded. And then additionally, if this is, if you have a large fleet and your goal is to electrify the entire thing, let's say, but over a period of time, phase your requests, and so you can you can kind of use that to your advantage to one, make your application leaner and more approvable, but then use the success from that initial phase, secondary and tertiary phases that have a proven success behind them. Like, we did this before, we know what we're doing, we're just going to add, we're going to add to that success. um, those secondary and tertiary applications have a much higher likelihood of being approved. So phasing is often really good. And then lastly, it's just again, I would say becoming aware of the technology landscape, and all these programs require open source tech. On the charging side, it's OCPP, right? Open Charge Point Protocol. Interoperability between hardware and software. But then as you start to think about operating that fleet over time, having things like making sure that your software providers and hardware providers are offering kind of an open API interface ecosystem. They offer services or feeds like OpenADR for demand response. Certainly, UL certification on any of the advanced features. But I think that the point of open tech is that you're not going to be able to anticipate what it's going to the solutions you will need to operate this new fleet over an extended period of time. There are going to be things thrown at the fleet, whether it's new electricity tariffs, power constraints, duty cycle changes. Having an openness to the technology you're deploying allows you to leverage new solutions and kind of bolt them on easily, as opposed to putting something in that's very rigid. That, and like, we're already to the point where most large fleet deployments are already thinking about, what one would call like a micro grid project, right? Batteries, solar, pretty sophisticated energy management controls. Like, those are already, that's a today thing, not even a tomorrow thing. And tomorrow it will get more sophisticated. And so having, technology that you're deploying today that you expect to have a 10-year or longer useful life, you want it to be adaptable.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, what we're looking at also down the road, and not too far off the horizon, is V2X applications. Whether it's a microgrid that you mentioned, or directly back to the grid itself.
And then I think, this is assuming you get approved, and I think it's great to think about these things again as a part of your application. It just strengthens and increases it allows you to set yourself apart from other applications in the pile, but it's also going to, ensure a higher likelihood of success with the operation of that fleet over time. So a lot of these programs that have been mentioned have, there's compliance requirements, so different things that you have to meet in order to, to be eligible for the funding. You sign up to, in the most basic sense, like providing data back on the operation of your fleet, so these states and programs can learn. Companies like ours, and to some a more sophisticated side, on the telematics side, there are companies that will provide these services, almost automate the data reporting and stuff for these programs. So one, know that you're signing up for these things, and and then you can plan around them so that it doesn't become a real big burden as you operate that fleet. Because again, it's probably a motion that the fleet manager that uses some kind of an internal combustion vehicle today is not having to do, right? And you don't want to throw that curveball at them unknowingly after the fact. There are ways to make that easy. We already talked about the kind of openness, open architecture, I think is really important. Again, it goes far beyond just hardware software interoperability. And I think a lot of the folks that be watching this know what OCPP is and understand the benefits of that. But it's about openness to these other technologies that are going to inevitably become a part of the fleet, the electric fleet ecosystem. Um, Power management is also key, right? Like, I think today, It starts with planning, right? Making sure that you're right sizing the infrastructure to meet not just the vehicle you're buying. Like it's not just about what's the fastest charge that thing can take. It's about the duty cycle and what charging infrastructure. It's not like gas and diesel where you just, you fill it up once a week or twice a week or whatever it is. It's a much more, and it frankly, it can add to the efficiency of the fleet if it's right sized. And I think, thinking about having dynamic power management tools, again, often supported by open APIs that allow you to really hone in the majority of your operating costs once you own one of these fleets is the electricity that they consume, right? To charge them up. You want to be able to manage that as automatically as you possibly can. So if making sure that these kinds of tools are part of the initial design will make your life so much easier and allow you to optimize the economic picture of that conversion over time. Um, the other big, huge thing, right? And this is obvious, but we got to talk about it is reliability, right? As you're designing these things out, at the end of the day, those chargers for the vehicle to be ready for work and operating as expected to meet the vehicle demands. You have to have an infrastructure solution that uptime and reliability have to be a core focus. And so there are variety of solutions, whether it's on the hardware side, the software side, service provider side. There's a bunch of awesome work that I know we're a big part of. There's other companies as well offering solutions that can really push. I'd say hold that uptime threshold very high so that the fleet can rest assured that the infrastructure is going to be there and it's gonna be there when they need it. And then lastly is just where possible, and this does to some extent balance or you could argue it conflicts with the argument of phasing, but I think there's lots of opportunities even if you're phasing a project to make really good decisions around like the investments, whether it's in trenching, conduits, head end electrical infrastructure, the main service, like if there's opportunities to make really cost efficient investments in your kind of first phase that will make expansion so much, not just less costly, but faster and easier after the fact. So thinking about like not just this one application, this first project, but where might this go for your fleet over or your customer over 5 or 10 years, and making some good decisions now around layouts, trenching, conduits, maybe it's the main service from the electric utility so that you can expand more quickly.
Awesome, John. I mean, I think these are all great points, and I think that, great rules or tips to live by when you're thinking about a project and thinking about the project not just for today or this year or next year, but like, as a continued effort 10 years down the road, as you get towards that final shape of what your end goal is. So as far as the presentation part of the webinar, we're pretty much at the end of our slides. So I wanted to allow for a couple of minutes for folks to gather their thoughts if they have any questions. In the meantime, and as we wait for that, Tom, I wanted to kind of go back to this slide for you. And it's like if you were to look at this slide, like is there anything you would add or comment on that would be helpful for like designing for success?
Well, a really important point here is that there's a big difference between these lighter vehicles and tractor trailers. Huge difference. Almost might as well be two different industries
Hmm.
as far as providing infrastructure that could be level 2, or even if it's level 3, it might be on the light end of level 3. That's not that big a lift. And if you're providing either the high side of level 3, even into MCS, boy, that's a completely different beast. And for those projects, it is so important to get working with a utility really early because it could be a couple years before that project gets energized. Or if, as John mentioned, maybe it's not. I mean, there might be a huge lift on the utility side just to get that power over to the fence. So just understand that difference, and that's goes with phasing the request, right? So a smaller project is a lot easier to launch than launching with a bigger project, as well as getting funded. It's not just about getting funded, but it's also just the complexity.
Yeah.
And
Would it be fair, Tom,
yeah,
to say, would it be fair, Tom, to say that if you've already had a couple of successful smaller projects, by the time you get to that big, class 8 project, it may be a
right.
little bit easier?
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, some of these truck as a service, charging as a service providers, if you want to get your dip your feet in the water sooner, go to some of these partners. You don't have to necessarily put this in yourself to start. So you can certainly get used to these trucks through some of these providers that can get you hooked up right away. And then if this seems really interesting, I want to go in deeper. Maybe then you consider starting your own project.
Yep. Makes total sense. Thank you for that. No, as far as there's a lot to digest here, so we'll be making this session available on demand. We'll be making the slides available, so keep an eye out for that on our different channels, whether it's LinkedIn or a YouTube channel on our website. So we'll be making also the team available for questions offline if need be. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out, to myself or to Tom or to John, and we'll be more than happy to align you with the right information as you move into these types of projects or have questions about a current project you may have. But thank you so much for sticking with us. I know this was a lot of information. Hopefully, this was useful, and we will see you on the next session.